Running Sentences presents The Lost Adventures of a Maybe Hero, Part 8. An all-out fight to escape. Leonardo finds himself in the midst of a prison break, one which he terribly wanted, but is surprised that it's actually happening. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and incidences within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, real incidences, real situations, real events, and/or fictional situations, people, events, incidences, and etc. are purely coincidental. Copyright 2022. Michael Honore. All rights reserved. Leonardo stared at the end of the tunnel, where Catalina now proudly stood in a hole that had been created. Of course, she wasn't going to tell him how she'd found him, because that would make life simple. This was annoying, and he felt his temper rising drastically. Congrats, you're rescuing a bunch of reclusive superheroes who have been stuck in a prison by the government, apparently. You didn't tell me that. How could I? The only thing I knew was that you called me and that I was in the cave and that somehow I got a phone call from people. Now all I know is that the government and Hugo, and maybe your father, Jeeves, got me stuck in this prison training center. Wait, my dad? Francine had crushed a rock in her hands, which made both Catalina and Leonardo jump in surprise. They looked over at her with her dour and frustrated expression. What is going on? It's difficult to explain without making me sound bad, but I found a phone in my bedroom one day. The woman, he pointed towards Catalina and then waved his hand about, named Catalina here, who I happen to know, was on the other end of that. I told her to come save me. She said she would do what she could, but didn't think she could. And now here she is, and not bothering to explain how she found me. The whoop and a wail of a siren began echoing about the place, leaving the trio looking for a source of it. Well, it does not sound like we have much time, so I suggest if there is anyone else you'd like to save and bring them out of this place, you might want to do it quickly. Catalina then vanished back through the hole, and Francine had brushed past Leonardo in a second, rushing off to somewhere. And he stood there, sort of dumbfounded. Where did this hole lead to? He moved closer to get a look at it, and there was a lot of brightness out there. He blinked, trying to adjust to it. Was it because he hadn't seen the sun in so long? The question lingered as he stood near this hole, trying to look in. The look felt like the sun lamps in the backyard of the cave home. Things were too bright, and it smelled of a trap, a thought he could not rule out. Catalina? What is it? How did you find me? You're still going on about that. Yes, why wouldn't I? It's highly suspicious, and you've never told me the whole truth, and now I might not be able to trust your father who got me stuck in here. Then wouldn't I just lie to you right about now and tell you it's all okay? You could, yes, but it would at least give me a feeling for what you're up to if you would say something other than why. Fine. It came to me that you would be taken either by the mob or by the government. Who else could sneak you away without anyone noticing? Then it was a pretty simple job, searching facilities that are under control by government or the mob or whatever. I ruled out the mob since the bank we hit wasn't related to the mob, but I did have plenty of government contacts and contracts to go on and so on. So anyway, I looked around and found a secret facility and used a few connections I have to get around. Easy peasy. That did not sound easy to Leonardo one bit, and slightly unbelievable. Granted, the part about the bank and the government contracts seemed about right. Everything else? Contacts? Breaking into a government facility easily? The sound of footsteps behind him drew him away from the hole, and just in time to look down the tunnel to see 5 supers running towards him at blinding speed. He'd opened his mouth to warn them that this felt off. There was, however, a gust of wind that he figured was one of them running past him and then through the wall, since there was a heavy crash and a few rocks broke away from the wall, scattering everywhere and anywhere that they could go. This was followed by a variety of other crashes as the other heroes went through the wall instead of going through the hole. When all of the noise died down, he turned to look at the end of the tunnel that now had several holes in it. This was going swimmingly well, he figured. Is everybody okay over there? He waited and peeked around the corner of the hole to see what was going on. The blinding lights remained on, making it hard to see anything. His mind couldn't figure out if it was worth it to go through to the other side or not. It did not feel like it would be a good idea. Will you come through already? Catalina's voice cut through him. He was expecting Hugo or the heroes to suddenly say something. His mind pictured that the heroes might have run through whoever was beyond because freedom. Are the others actually okay? The heroes that ran through the wall, you mean? Well, they kind of knocked themselves out running through the wall. I guess they'll be fine. To trust or not? Leonardo found his head swimming. His only way out of here was potentially forward, or through Hugo, upstairs maybe. And he didn't think he could actually get back upstairs now that he thought about it. His only way out of here was potentially through this hole in the wall, or through Hugo, and Hugo had insisted getting angry was the way to become a hero, but it didn't seem like it would happen, and also a really odd way to be a hero. Angry all the time to help save the day? That could not be healthy. Also, he didn't know of a good way to go up back to the facility that they were on because he didn't know how he'd gotten down, really. This is a trap, isn't it? He announced this as he began to step through the hole. The lights were not as harsh on the other side, and Leonardo clearly saw a cave, not the outside world he'd been hoping for. The slab gray, domed cave space and stones all seemed to glisten in the light. His further look about the place put 5 unconscious heroes before him and Catalina standing in front of the heroes, who were all splayed out in a sort of state. So this is a trap, isn't it? All I see is a cave and no way out. Catalina waved her hand off to the right, and he looked that way. There didn't appear to be anything over there. It isn't a trap. You should trust me more. Are these people coming with us or no? I guess they are? Another wave of Catalina's hand brought some familiar faces to light. Her gang members, of whose names he now had managed to forget, were moving towards the still unconscious Supes. However, picking up the big bodies of the heroes was no easy task, and there was lots of tugging to get Francine to move more than an inch for these 3 regular people, he supposed. It perhaps didn't help that they were grabbing at the hero's uniform, which, of course, was spandex and instantly stretched this way and that, with no movement to be had. Now do you trust me? Leonardo shrugged, and she rolled her eyes and began walking away very fast. The blaring alarm was still going on in the background, and reminded him that sticking around here was not a good idea. He went over towards Natalie, grabbing her arm, and with some effort began pulling her towards where Catalina had rushed off to. The trip was disturbed halfway across the harsh, rocky ground, as the arm that was in both of his hands suddenly vanished. He sprang back and looked about to see that Natalie had woken up and looked very disturbed. Natalie? We're in the middle of an escape, so if you could... She instantly seemed to come about, and then looked to catch her bearings. The others? Leonardo could only awkwardly point towards the 3 gang members, still near the holes in the tunnel entrance, trying to get the other hero, Francine, moving. Natalie got to her feet, looking rather red and angry that something was happening. They're trying to save her, I believe, not harm her before you go all superhero on them. But we don't have time either way for, anger, so the government might be trying to keep you here against your will. Yeah, you need to go help the rest of your group if you want to get out. She was gone in a flash, and before he could turn around to try and find where the exit was, she was back, this time with 2 heroes over her shoulders. "Where are we going?" This way, I think." He moved off quickly as he could towards where he'd seen Catalina vanish off to. The round cave narrowed downwards and came into a new tunnel-like space off to the side where Catalina had disappeared to. Leonardo had followed it until it came to a tram line, where, there on this rail line, stood a small tram-car engine with a few carts attached to it. Natalie had gone and already dumped off Daniel and Tom into the latest cart and went off again. Leonardo kept walking until he was at the front of this train where the engine was, and looked up to see Catalina busily and happily working on some stuff inside. He clambered aboard up here. He came in and closed the door, and then leaned against it, half hoping that this was the only way out of here, since he had many questions for her, if only he could think of what they were. "Are your friends aboard?" "They should be in a second or two." There was a sound of thunks and weight shifting in the back as the tramcars moved about and jostled, and she began fiddling with the controls, making herself familiar with them as she got them started up. He looked back and saw some thumbs up, and the tram was already slowly beginning to move. "Now, I just hope the government is a little slow to react today." A twang hit the engine cabin and died off a second later. Leonardo swung about to see a few camouflaged men running towards them with heavy-looking guns. "Your wish is not being granted at this time." She hit a lever-looking like thing, and with a whine the engine became louder. This vehicle of a tram began moving a little faster, and seemed to be picking up some speed. The men chasing them, though, did not appear to be giving up despite this. "Well, I've done all I can do. Now we just have to wait and see what happens." "Great. Just great. By the way, do we have any weapons of our own? I don't mean standard ones. There are superheroes who are likely to try and stop us." The tram had been moving faster and faster and leaving the guards now behind, and they slowly began giving up. Catalina had pointed off towards the briefcase near the door, where he stood, his first thought being a briefcase as a weapon. It didn't sound helpful, but maybe it could be. There was a lot of crazy things going on lately, and then his mind decided to tell him that it was probably something inside the briefcase, and he should stop trying to imagine things. That last thought was something he took great contention with. "What's in there?" "A government-stolen item. They call it the Little Helper, but it was a grab-and-go job, and I never did get to drop it off with the people who hired me to grab it. Also, I never looked inside to see what's in there. I just know what it is." "So you could have grabbed an empty briefcase?" "Yeah." They both sort of stared at the briefcase. Leonardo did not want to be the one who opened it, but he didn't think Catalina was going to either, and so he moved to pick it up by the handle, then decided to set it on its side to open it up. With a click and a clack, the 2 locks on it came open, and they stared at the black foam interior as he opened it, like one might find in a gun case for protecting a weapon. The weapon inside this one appeared to be a long, thin object that had the same sort of dimensions one might associate with a thumb drive stick. It was that, or it was the little white manual book beside it that was the weapon. That manual had the words, "The Little Helper User Guide" on it. "Our weapon choice is a thumb drive. Are we supposed to plug it into a superhero? Where does one plug a thumb drive into one of them? Does that mean they're actually robots?" He glanced up towards Catalina, who shrugged and moved to kneel down beside him. However, something caught her eye, and she went back to the controls. "You might need to figure out how to use that pretty quickly. I think we have a floating hero out in front of us." She pulled hard on a lever, which locked up the brakes, as the tram suddenly came screaming to a stop. At first, he grabbed hold of some railing to help guard against any heavy movement, and as the tram came to a slow and then stopped, he grabbed at the manual, trying to see what it had to say. He kept glancing up and back down at the manual as a few light flashes passed them, along with the sound of rushing wind. He figured that the 5 heroes he'd come to know had gone to fight, and with the heavy sound of punches echoing about the tunnel and into the cabin engine, it certainly seemed like a fight. He concentrated on the manual, which was all of 2 pages. It showed a person holding the thumbstick and pointing it towards another person, and then pressing the button on top. Not feeling confident one bit, he grabbed the little helper and moved to get out of the tram engine car. He landed on the hard stone floor of the tunnel and turned to see Hugo floating there with Daniel in his hands. He had his hands around the man's neck. "I told you to stay where you are. You didn't listen to me, and no one thinks having you in the world is a good idea. Washed-up, useless hero." The tunnel exploded into smoke and dust, which gave Leonardo a moment to collect himself. He stood near the tram engine car, trying to make his legs move one way or another. But they did not want to obey at this second. The dust had begun to clear, showing Hugo floating where he'd been, but Daniel was no longer in his grasp. In fact, the hero was now implanted in the wall next to Hugo. Then the hero's attention turned towards the tram car, and had noticed Leonardo, still standing there, trying to move. Hugo moved a few feet forward towards him, which was not what Leonardo wanted at all. The only thing he could do was try and point this thing in his hands towards the hero. But with shaky hands... "Oh, look, a bug has appeared. And have you figured out how to get your powers yet, little one?" "I'm not a bug, and I have no powers." "Pity then. You might have been useful in drawing out your parents. Alas, it wasn't meant to be." A small rock bounced off of Hugo's face, and both he and Leonardo turned to see Catalina standing atop of the front of this engine tram car thing. She had a bunch of tiny pebbles in one hand, and had another one ready to throw in her other. "Problem, loser? Who are you?" "The grandest thief of them all. Some call me Cat, others call me not-so-nice names, and I run the Righteous Right gang." "You're a criminal, and you're helping an idiot. Well, the 2 of you can get out of the way, please." There was a wave to Hugo's hand, which caused a massive gust of wind to send dust and debris everywhere. Leonardo leaned into it, hoping he had the strength to avoid being swept away, but knowing that he did not actually have that, and he even put up his arms to protect his face from debris. The shocking thing was that he was not swept away by it all, and remained where he was. He blinked a few times when the dust had settled down, and removed his arms from in front of his face. He blinked, and blinked some more, then looked over towards where Catalina had been. She was a few inches from her original spot, but still atop the engine. Leonardo looked over towards this superhero known as Hugo. Was that the best you have? I was expecting a little bit more." "It is enough for most rats." Hugo moved his hand to wave it again. This time, though, Leonardo remembered the clicker thumb drive in his hand. He pointed it towards Hugo and pressed the button. A little red light atop seemed to shoot out of it, but other than that... Leonardo flipped it around and pointed it once again towards the hero, and pressed the button. This had not gone unnoticed by Hugo, who had stopped his hand-waving attack and floated a few feet closer towards Leonardo. "What are you doing?" Leonardo looked up surprised, as he'd been looking over the thumb drive to see if there was anything else to it. So far from his examination, all he had was the button and the little red light. Another rock hit Hugo's face, but this time he ignored it, coming closer to Leonardo once again. The hero's face seemed to have darkened and reddened with a bit of rage to it. But Leonardo had little time to notice this. He did keep looking up and down this device again, hoping for some changes to occur. "Rat, bug, infantile little human, I have asked you a question. What are you doing? Now answer me before I get mad." "I'm trying to use the damned little helper." "The what?" "The little helper. It's supposed to be a government tool for stopping heroes." Leonardo had pointed it at Hugo, who was now in front of him as he pressed and held the button. His life, he figured, depended upon this thing in his hands, but he didn't really trust it since nothing had been happening so far. "The government?" With a glance upwards, he saw the towering, floating Hugo and decided to point towards Catalina. That's all I know. The greatest thief in the world over there. She's the one who took it." "Hey, don't rat me out." Hugo had turned to her and begun floating a little bit towards her. "What is this about the government?" "A short story made a bit long. The country's government, as far as I know, has a secret workshop and tools and so on. One where they test and build crazy gadgets. I was asked to steal some tech from there and give it to someone else. This tool was called the Little Helper, and it works against superheroes." "How does it work against them?" "Actually haven't figured that part out yet. But we're going to keep at it until we escape." Leonardo had kept the device pointed at Hugo, who turned now to look at what was in his hands. "Is that all?" "What, this thing in my hands? No, I don't think so at all. I think it's actually most of it is still in the briefcase in the tram car engine." The hero eyed him rather suspiciously, but still moved towards the door to the tram engine car. He was also getting a very odd look from Catalina, who was mouthing something, but in the slightly dark tunnel that was hard to make out. Leonardo instead resorted to trying to jerk his head to the side to show that they should probably start moving and run away. Once the hero had gone through the cabin, Leonardo simply took off running down the tunnel. He didn't expect to get far at all, and the need to do something was too strong, and this was potentially his only option. A clatter of steps behind him made him glance backwards to see a rather angry-looking Catalina. She seemed to be aiming for him, though, instead of escaping, which probably wasn't a good thing for him, and he could figure out exactly why it was. He, after all, had just run away. "You bastard! What do you expect me to do when the thing you stole doesn't seem to do anything? I'm not a hero. You're supposed to be the one giving me a head start since you're the hero." "I'm not a hero either." He tried to speed up the best he could, but his legs were already pumping and going as fast as they could. And despite his efforts, Catalina was catching him when he threw glances backwards towards her. His greatest concern, actually, was the angry hero would not yet come out of the tram car. Why? It didn't matter, as things up ahead were changing, with bright lights. An early morning, followed by a cold breeze and a stiff, harsh light, greeted them as they came out of the tunnel. Leonardo scrambled to a stop to gulp in some fresh air. The first taste of such stuff in, well, he didn't know how long, and this calm, quiet peacefulness did not last, as several people with guns pointed towards them now came out. "Are these your people, Catalina?" I get the feeling that they aren't, but also that I shouldn't ask just to be on the safe side instead of doing anything else. "Never had the pleasure of meeting them before." "Oh joy, this is going badly then, isn't it?" A crash of noise from behind, followed by smoke and debris and dust, followed them and circled around him and Catalina. One of the heroes, perhaps? Or worse, Hugo was now amongst them. "Everyone freeze where you are, please. No one move." The unknown voice cut through the smoke and dust, which was soon settling down to reveal the angry Hugo near them. The hero stood huffing and puffing between them with a wild-eyed look that verged on anger of some sort. There was no movement from anyone. Good. Now Simon says that you should all go back inside the tunnel and back to where you were. Pretend that none of this has happened. Thank you very much." "Charlie, you rat of a human. You have been planning to exterminate those with powers, aren't you?" "The game does not work like that, Hugo. You must do what I say, or you will find yourself very sad very quickly. Now do as I say." Hugo looked like he tensed up for a few seconds with a bend in his knees, and suddenly pounced forward. A new cloud of dusty debris came to say hello towards Leonardo and Catalina. Leonardo held where he was for a few seconds, trying to decide what to do. Only an idiot would stand around. Catalina's voice came past him in a hurry, though through the dust, which was not settling down this time. He looked this way and that, trying to locate it, and then decided that it had gone off to his right, and so he headed in that direction. Clear of the dust, Leonardo found himself headed down a windy road that crossed back upon itself in a series of hairpin turns, all so that he could get down the mountainside. He glanced around for Catalina or anyone, in case the guards were chasing him or somebody was chasing him, because it was good to know if someone was. The dirty, dusty road held no one except for himself, which was good, but also confusing. But perhaps it was for the best that he and Catalina had split up. He kept going, following the road through the hairpins, his legs burning as he went, downward and downward. It took some time for the road to come to an end, and Leonardo felt it throughout his body as he came to a stop at the edge of this road, his breath beleagueredly coming out as he nearly fell over. And then there was some noise coming from up on top of the mountain area where they'd been, with lots of crashes and screams. Things were going swimmingly up there, so no need to stick around, right? A few seconds more were taken to collect himself before he began looking at where he was. A car parking lot with nary a car, or maybe it was just a dirt lot, of ground next to the road. But his hope of salvation was not here to get away, and so with a tired body, he could or would get further away. But that's exactly what he needed to do. To the road I go. Come on, legs and body. We either escape or we get blown into a million bits by a hero or soldiers or... He'd managed to get himself moving down the side of the road, looking for any passing cars. There were quite a few that zipped past, and he tried to give a plaintive look from his face, one that said he needed a ride. The thought that the look wasn't enough did occur to him, because at the speed the cars were going, they didn't really have time to notice him. Leonardo resorted to the old standby that he'd learned through comic books, holding his hand out with his thumb up as a car came by. Oddly enough, this first car that he saw when he did this slowed and then came to a stop a few feet down the road. Not one to wait around, Leonardo did his hobbled best to get up over to this vehicle, hoping that it wasn't going to speed away in laughter. He was surprised when it didn't, and a young couple greeted him with a rolled-down window on the passenger side. "Hop on in, man." Leonardo nodded and feebly reached for the door handle to the back door of the sedan, getting in with the last bit of his energy. The seat he sat on was a bit hard, yet felt nice to have some support. He leaned back in the seat, half closing his eyes and letting out a comforting sigh. "Where you headed, man?" The words brought Leonardo back from his sleepy state as he pulled his head upright. Thank you. You can drop me off at the next town, I guess." "You sure? It's only 6 miles from here. I can take you as far as Dove's Tail Township, which is where we're headed." The thought sounded nice to Leonardo, but he then thought of the government and the superheroes coming searching for him as it invaded his mind. He was probably putting these people at risk. The next town is fine, thank you." The driver shrugged and turned back towards the road and got the vehicle going. All Leonardo could possibly do, though, was melt into a seat and catch a few Z's. With a stifled yawn, Leonardo woke up, leaning against the door of the car. It was quiet, cool, and from the look outside, it was much darker than it had been. The car was also turned off, and the young couple that had been in front, driving the vehicle, were not there. His mind instantly went to fear running through him that something had happened, but a further look showed no signs of anything happening within the car, and he idly reached for the door handle and popped the door open. A large, slab, grey building, made of grey stone, and the word "Downtown Mall" upon the side of the wall greeted him. The sign had begun to flicker to life, with the lights behind it. The parking lot to this place, this mall, wasn't busy, and only had a few cars around, which made Leonardo nervous. He would be easy to find in such a spot, and then his mind thought of the couple, and turned to look for them. They were nowhere to be found out here. Maybe they were in the long, stretched-out mall? But going in would potentially ruin any meeting back here. What to do? The cry of a seagull, more of a squawkish noise than anything, made him jump, safety first, as he hurried forward. The entrance to the mall did not look good as he approached it. Where normally there would have been glass windows and doors showing the interior or an interior door, here there were many patched up spots, some with tarp, other times with plywood. The sight worried him as things were probably not much better inside. But his mind overruled the thought, since safety was his number one concern, and not being spotted was a close second. Maybe 1B, if he thought of it that way. Then the automatic doors had already swished open, so he went through. The interior of the mall was not in much better shape. The glass railing near the escalator was mostly gone, and it had been replaced by some panel wood or tarp on other spots, and the escalator itself didn't appear to be working. There was, however, a sign that said it was now stairs, and to use the escalator as such. He, however, was drawn towards a nearby clothing store, since one look at himself and his spandex workout outfit told him that he stood out. The entranceway looked half closed, with a few lights out at this store that called itself Clothes for You and Me. But it didn't stop him as he entered it. To his right were the men's clothes, and to his left the women's. Leonardo looked between the two sections, torn between which way to go. If someone had seen him come in here, they would expect him to go to the men's clothes section. However, going to the women's clothing section, he wasn't sure he could pull off that look, not without some face-altering makeup at least, and body-altering methods or something. He skittered between the two before finally heading off towards the men's. He started looking through the shirts, which were the nearest thing to him, wondering what he was going to do about them, since they all looked pretty similar to one another, and, well, it just didn't seem all that interesting. He glanced about to get a feel for the place once more, and see where he might head next. The pants section wasn't far away, and there were a few people around. That was, except for one man, who seemed to be near the entrance and staring right at him. This man moved a few feet in from the entrance, and then stopped moving. Leonardo decided to move towards the back of the store, which would give him a chance to see if the man followed him. And he was pretty sure that this man was going to follow him, so, well, one little test wouldn't hurt, right? The hurried pace that took him to the back towards the sale items on deep discounts did not lose the man. He was followed, and panic began to spread through Leonardo as he tried to fast walk around the racks of clothes that were a mix and match of whatever needed the most rack space. This man followed the path that Leonardo was making, and was quickly approaching. To this, Leonardo froze up as to what to do next, and by the time he had gotten his feet moving again, the man was right beside him. The dark, slick suit that the man wore gleamed in the fluorescent lights, and almost looked like it reflected light right off of it. To this, Leonardo backed a few steps up to give himself some room to escape the man, though he didn't think he would get away, even if this man was thin and tiny looking. "Mr. Leonardo, I have come to fetch you. I am from the government, and we wish to help you." The man had reached to his inner jacket and pulled out a wallet of some sort. He flipped it open to show the initials SJIU. Leonardo wondered what that initialization could mean. Something to do with supers, no doubt. Still, it didn't concern him, and he backed a few steps further away. "Please come with me right away." "And if I don't want to?" "That would be very bad. Forces are trying to take you away within the government and, well, the mob. If they succeed, then a superhero fight might occur, and we don't want that. The world cannot sustain a fight of that proportion." "This doesn't involve me." "It does, because the whole thing settles around your parents. They disappeared because the mob was gathering and creating their own super-powered people to stop them. This started a bit of an arms race between who could make superheroes, but that did slightly get put to the side when your parents disappeared because they were perhaps the most powerful of heroes. But that war is now threatening to erupt again, thanks to you." Even if I believed you and what you were saying, why involve me? With sudden steps, the man closed in on him, lowering his voice to a whisper. The badge, which was still dangling by the grasp of the man's fingers, and came closer. He could read some of the other things now, namely that the name of this man was Roger Hall, then that the SJIU, the Superhero Justice Investigation Unit, was the name that he was looking at. Because of you, sir. You and your powers are the first real hero powers that have been naturally created in a while. We are afraid that you are being taken away by the mob. Leonardo looked desperately about for someone to come to save him. The store area around here was mostly empty, aside from a few cashiers, who didn't seem to see him. So much for worker hospitality. Look, Mr. Roger Hall, or whoever you really are, you have the wrong Leonardo. I'm no hero, and I'm just here to shop for new clothes. The spandex you are wearing, sir, is a dead giveaway. It's similar to the stuff used by mobbed-up heroes. Also, Miss Catalina gave us a photo of you. There were plenty of thoughts going through Leonardo's mind at this second. But he wasn't sure he could grab a hold of them, as he felt like he'd suddenly been run into a solid cement wall. What little sense he could make of it all felt weird and untrustworthy. Catalina, of course. By the way, Mr. Leonardo, the couple that picked you up work for me, so you don't have to worry about them. Leonardo decided very firmly and very harshly that he regretted ever wanting to leave home for any adventure whatsoever. This was the only thing he could think of at this moment, because he had been safe and sound and bored. Here, out in the wilds of civilization, he'd gotten things thrown at him as if they were the answer to questions he hadn't known existed. But what to do? Running was a good answer, but how far could he get? His mind was trying to come up with some questions to buy him some time to think, and maybe run. The thought made his mind spin a little bit, though. He was wasting time thinking of a question so that he could think about other things. That wasn't how things worked. Do you know a Daniel? Worked for the government and then things went bad for him and his team? Yes, I do. They went on a job for us and then they vanished. We have been searching high and low for them ever since then. The belief was that they were kidnapped by the mob, but we had no proof or evidence. You do know how mad that sounds, right? Superheroes taken, kidnapped by the mob? Yes, it is a bit mad, and unfortunately for us, the mob has money, power, and the ability to get people to do things for them. And that has led to people getting things that they should not have. What about the hero Hugo? What about him? Was he a part of your organization, this SJIU thingy? And is talking about all of this in a public space really a good idea? We own the facility, Mr. Leonardo. You have nothing to fear here. As for Hugo, I have not heard that name as a hero. Not as part of our group, anyway. Maybe another government group, but I doubt it. Probably the mob. The want and need to escape fled from Leonardo. It didn't seem like it would happen, and running wasn't exactly going to get him very far. He didn't have a car, the pangs of hunger were making itself known, and he honestly felt like shit and wanted to get out of these clothes. Am I your hostage? Oh no, not hostage. We wish to work with you to solve the great grand issue of the mob. Great. Can I trade information for food and clothes then, so I can, get out of these? The man seemed surprised that such an offer was being made, but didn't say anything, and then nodded yes. Okay, the hero group led by Daniel and involved Natalie, Tom, Francine, and one or two other people's names I cannot remember. They were being held or kept up in the Dust Town mine, the actual mine itself. I see. Well, you should grab some stuff off the rack and get changed in one of the dressing rooms. Then meet me out front of the store in the mall area. The man headed off towards the cashier and pointed towards Leonardo, and when he was at the cashier, gave a curt nod to the workers there. They returned it, but stayed where they were. This left Leonardo alone in the clothing store, with a choice of stuff to try on. This was something he couldn't really remember ever doing, but he sort of went about it like he knew what he was doing. He shuddered because of the black spot in his memory, but went about trying on some clothes. He settled on some plain ones, and nothing exciting in a solid colored shirt and some comfy, slightly stretchy pants. Then went about to meet this Roger. He was greeted by the man who stood out just inside the mall, leaning against the railing which protected this floor from the floor below, or rather people simply trying to walk to the floor below. "I have sent out my team to do a bit of research on that area you have told me about." Okay. By the way, Catalina's probably in that area as well as her gang. She helped me escape. She was the one who found you. No wonder she asked for a bunch of things that made no sense, like having us patrol the Dust Town mine area for roadside stragglers. Did you, by the way, learn of who was in charge there? Hugo was, but I think he might have been ordered around by Charlie, maybe? Can't remember exactly. Roger nodded carefully and came away from the railing, pointed towards the escalator. He moved without saying anything, which was annoying to Leonardo. Was it so hard to say what they were going to do now? Leonardo could barely hold back the thought, but did not vocalize it. The food court is still alive and kicking in this mall. It has quite a few options worth checking out, and is downstairs, and we can talk more along the way. They moved over towards the escalator, and then down it, and using it as a staircase down. The stores on this first floor were little better than the ones upstairs. A few still were open and had glass walls to show the interiors, but more than a few also had plywood coverings that should be windows. That or the stores were just completely closed with fancy sign posters for the owner of them all, showing off nice-looking people and stores that might come soon. Despite saying that they could talk more along the way, Leonardo was quiet, trying to think up of what he should be asking. The food court, though, was soon upon them. The smell of fresh fried foods and other delectable smells crowded into Leonardo. He couldn't think of a time when things had ever smelt so nice. And there was a variety of fast food places here, from pizza to burgers to pretty much just about anything. It was also busy, and the only thing Leonardo could think to do was stare and take it all in. "Feel free to grab something from any of the places. Just say my name at the cashier." There was more staring to be done by Leonardo as his mind tried to sort through what it wanted to eat. No decisions were coming, and his stomach was grumbling more and more at the smells. If you don't mind, could you just go pick something for me? I think I need to go sit down for a few minutes and, collect myself. He decided not to wait for a response and trudged off towards the many tables. It took a bit of searching to find one empty one that had room for 2 people. Leonardo had went snaking to and fro before he sat down at this one, and he wondered if this wasn't all in his mind. Hunger, he knew, was a powerful thing, and perhaps it could cause illusions that would make a place seem busy. It was the only thing that made sense to him, since why would all of these people be in a dead mall? One could get fast food pretty much anywhere, right? A few minutes of looking around did not satisfy him one way or another on this matter, and he gave up on thinking about it. The man, the government agent, supposedly, was heading towards him with a tray of stuff on it. He felt his stomach grumble more and more until the tray was slid down in front of him and the agent sat down across from him. "I hope you like sandwiches. It's got a lot of Italian-sounding meats and some mozzarella on it, plus oil and red wine vinegar, and some oregano and salt and pepper, I believe. It's what I usually get." Leonardo merely nodded as his hands moved on their own to pick up the sub sandwich that had been cut in half. His teeth sank into the bread and the deliciousness that he had to savor before the first bite was even completed. Then he began to devour it as quickly as he could. "While you're eating, I feel I should fill you in on some more things. Firstly, Catalina is working for the government in an arranged fashion. She does what we want, and her record suddenly becomes squeaky clean. We are unsure of how she found you, but we did have some ideas that you might be in the area thanks to rainstorms. Having finished this first half of a sandwich and devoured it, Leonardo took a second to digest the news and the food. Once again, people think I have something to do with the constant rain that follows me around. I don't, and I don't have superpowers. I can't help you fight these people if that's what you're thinking. But the storms do follow you, and that is, to say the least, odd. Rain clouds and rain do not go following people around. Okay, fine, but it's not my fault that it does. Anyway, is there anything else that I should know before you whisk me away to some secret space never to be seen or heard from again? Yes, we need you to know that you are about to be plunged into a fight over the mob. There will be no hiding for you. I just said I don't have any powers. All I have is this, and it doesn't work. Leonardo had fetched the thumb drive thing, the tiny clicker thing, whatever it was, from his pocket. And for whatever reason he felt like showing it off right now, even though it was supposed to be a government device. How did you get that, I'm guessing, Catalina? So she stole that from us while we weren't looking. She is very crafty. Yes, that will come in handy for your fight, but you should finish eating first. Leonardo looked at the thing in his hand, unsure of what to do with it now. It hadn't worked when he tried it on a hero, and yet this agent was saying it would be helpful. He wound up putting it on the table and began eating again, since his stomach seemed to want more food to keep it happy. End of Part 8 of The Lost Adventures of a Maybe Hero. Thank you for listening.